Last night something shifted in your partner's heart. And no one around them noticed it happen. Not even them at first. Because some emotions do not arrive loudly. They arrive quietly. They arrive when the world finally slows down. They arrive when distractions lose their power. And that is exactly why this message has found you now. What happened last night was not imagination. It was not a random thought. And it was not coincidence. It was a moment when their heart stopped fighting itself. A moment when they could no longer silence what they truly feel for you. Even if they have been trying for a long time. Even if they told themselves they were fine. Even if they acted distant. Distracted. Or emotionally unavailable. Because the truth is this. When night falls and everything becomes quiet. Masks slip. Walls weaken. And the heart begins to speak in a language the mind can no longer control. And last night your partner's heart spoke your name without sound. Without words. But with weight. With pressure. With an ache that refused to be ignored. This was not casual missing. This was not nostalgia. This was not habit. This was deeper. Heavier. And far more dangerous to their emotional balance. Because they felt your absence in a way that shook them. Not only emotionally. But physically. Like something essential was missing from their system. They lay awake longer than usual. Staring into the dark. Letting thoughts circle back to moments they tried to bury. Conversations they replayed in their head. Small details about you they thought they had forgotten. The way you reacted to certain things. The way your energy changed a room. The way your presence once made life feel steady. And in that quiet space they realized something they were not ready to admit during the day. That no matter how hard they try to move forward. No matter how busy they keep themselves. No matter who else surrounds them. Their heart still recognizes you as home. And this realization did not comfort them. It disturbed them. Because it forced them to confront a truth they have been avoiding. That what they feel for you never truly left. It only went silent. And silence does not mean absence. Silence means pressure building underneath. Last night they questioned their own choices. They questioned the distance. They questioned why they let pride, fear, or confusion create space between you. They felt regret rise in waves. Not dramatic regret. Not loud regret. But the kind that sits heavy in the chest. The kind that makes breathing feel different. They thought about reaching out. Then stopped themselves. They imagined your reaction. They imagined rejection. They imagined vulnerability. And that fear kept their hands still. But their heart did not stop moving. Their heart kept pulling toward you. Over and over again. And this is important for you to understand. What their heart felt last night was not weakness. It was clarity. It was the moment they realized that pretending they are unaffected is exhausting them. That suppressing their emotions is costing them sleep, peace, and emotional stability. They are standing at a crossroads internally. One path continues silence, distance, and emotional denial. The other path requires honesty, courage, and risking their ego. And right now they are scared. But awareness has already begun. And once awareness begins, it cannot be undone. You may not hear from them immediately. You may not see instant action. But something fundamental has shifted. The emotional balance has changed. And from this point forward, they will not be able to think of you the same way again. Because last night their heart reminded them of the truth. And once the heart speaks this clearly, silence becomes impossible to maintain for long. From this point onward their inner world has not been the same. Even if the morning came and life tried to return to normal. Even if they went back to routine. Work. Messages. Responsibilities. Something inside them remained unsettled. Because when a heart speaks that honestly in the quiet of the night, the echo does not disappear with sunrise. It lingers. It follows them through the day. It interrupts their focus. It sneaks into small pauses between tasks. They find themselves zoning out. Staring without realizing it. Replaying fragments of you without intending to. And this is confusing them. Because they believed they had control. They believed they had moved on. Or at least convinced themselves they had. But now that belief is cracking. Slowly. Painfully. They are starting to notice how often their mind drifts toward you. How certain songs suddenly feel heavier. How familiar places trigger emotions they thought were resolved. How your absence feels louder than your presence ever did. And that scares them. Because it forces them to confront something they did not want to face. That what they feel for you was never shallow. Never temporary. And never replaceable. It was simply buried under fear and avoidance. Last night was the first time they stopped running from that truth. Even if only for a moment. Even if they did not fully accept it yet. Their defenses weakened. And when defenses weaken, truth leaks through. They admitted to themselves that they miss you in a way that cannot be explained away. Not just your company, but your energy, your understanding, the way you saw them when no one else did. And realizing this created pressure. Because now they must decide what to do with it. They are torn. On one side there is pride. The fear of looking foolish. The fear of being vulnerable. The fear of reopening something that could hurt again. On the other side there is longing. Regret. And the quiet knowing that ignoring this feeling will cost them peace. And right now they are stuck in between. Pretending on the outside. Wrestling on the inside. You may sense this shift without explanation. You may feel restless, emotional, or suddenly drawn to think about them more than usual. That is not accidental. Emotional connections do not dissolve easily. Especially when one heart wakes up before the other. There is an energetic pull that starts to reactivate. A subtle awareness that something is unfolding behind the scenes. What you must understand is this. Their silence does not mean indifference. Their delay does not mean disinterest. And their confusion does not erase what they feel. It simply means they are processing something they were not prepared to feel again. They are questioning their choices, their timing, their fear, and most of all, the possibility that they may have walked away from something real. There will come moments soon when they almost reach out. When their fingers hover over your name. When they type and delete messages. When they imagine conversations that never happen. And every time they stop themselves, the pressure grows. Because suppressing truth takes energy. And that energy is running out. You are not meant to chase. You are not meant to force clarity. You are meant to stay grounded, aware, and emotionally steady. Because what is unfolding is not about urgency. It is about inevitability. Once the heart admits what it feels, even silently, the direction has already been set. Last night was not the end. It was the beginning. The moment their emotional defenses cracked open. The moment their heart remembered you. And once remembrance happens, forgetting is no longer possible. As the hours pass, they are realizing something uncomfortable. That ignoring their feelings is no longer working the way it used to. Earlier they could distract themselves, stay busy, keep their mind occupied with noise. But now silence follows them even in crowds. And in that silence your presence keeps resurfacing. Not as a memory that fades, but as a truth that demands attention. They are starting to understand that what they felt last night was not temporary weakness. It was suppressed honesty rising to the surface. And once honesty appears, it asks questions that cannot be avoided forever. They are replaying moments where they pulled away. Moments where they chose distance instead of communication. Moments where fear spoke louder than love. And this replay is not gentle. It is uncomfortable. Because hindsight removes excuses. It strips away the narratives they told themselves to justify their actions. And what remains is accountability. They are beginning to see how much you gave without demanding. How much you understood without being understood in return. How much patience you showed while they stayed guarded. And this realization carries weight. Because it makes them confront the imbalance. The missed chances. The emotional debt that was never settled. They feel a quiet guilt now. Not dramatic. Not loud. But persistent. It shows up when they are alone. When they try to sleep. When something reminds them of the safety they once felt with you. And guilt mixed with longing creates pressure. Pressure to speak. Pressure to explain. Pressure to undo what cannot be undone easily. At the same time they are afraid. Afraid that too much time has passed. Afraid that you may have changed. Afraid that you may no longer be available emotionally. And this fear keeps them frozen. Wanting closeness. But terrified of rejection. Wanting connection. But scared of exposure. You might notice subtle shifts. A sudden message that feels casual but carries emotion underneath. A question that seems random but is carefully chosen. A reaction that feels more intense than expected. These are not accidents. These are cracks in the emotional armor they have been wearing. Understand this clearly. When someone suppresses feelings for a long time, the release is never clean. It comes in fragments. In hesitation. In mixed signals. In pauses. Because they are learning how to feel again. And learning always looks messy before it becomes clear. They are questioning themselves now. Asking why they cared so deeply if they were never going to act on it. Asking why your absence hurts more than your presence ever did. Asking why moving on feels heavier than staying. And these questions have no easy answers. What they felt last night planted something. A seed of awareness. And awareness grows even when ignored. It grows quietly. Patiently. Until it demands action. You are not meant to rush this process. And you are not meant to doubt your importance. Because what is happening is not random. It is the result of a connection that was real enough to survive silence. Real enough to resurface when defenses dropped. Their heart did not stay silent last night because it could not. Because it was tired of pretending. Tired of suppression. Tired of running. And once a heart reaches that point, change becomes unavoidable. The truth is moving toward the surface. Slowly. Inevitably. And when it arrives, it will not be whispered. What they are experiencing now is unfamiliar territory. Because for a long time they believed silence was control. Distance was safety. And avoidance was strength. But now that belief is collapsing from the inside. They are realizing that silence has not protected them. It has only delayed the truth. And delayed truth always returns with more force. Their heart is restless. Not dramatic. Not chaotic. But persistently unsettled. Like something unfinished refusing to stay buried. They find themselves comparing every interaction to you. Every conversation feels shallow in comparison. Every laugh feels incomplete. And this comparison frustrates them. Because it exposes the depth of what they once had. And depth is not easy to replace. They are beginning to understand that connection like yours does not appear often. And when it does, it leaves an imprint that time alone cannot erase. They are also noticing how guarded they became after you. How they stopped letting people in fully. How they started protecting themselves instead of connecting. And last night showed them why. Because opening their heart again would mean confronting the one place it never truly closed. You. There is a quiet sadness accompanying this realization. Not despair. But loss. The loss of what could have been handled differently. The loss of moments that never happened. The loss of words that stayed unspoken. And sadness like this does not ask for attention. It simply sits. Heavy. Patient. Waiting to be acknowledged. They are tempted to rationalize again. To tell themselves it is too late. That reaching out would change nothing. That staying silent is easier. But their heart is pushing back now, challenging those excuses. Because the pain of not knowing has begun to outweigh the fear of trying. You may feel a subtle pull toward introspection yourself, thinking about the connection from a calmer place. Without desperation. Without confusion. And that is important. Because emotional balance on your side changes the dynamic entirely. When one heart steadies, the other feels it. They are beginning to imagine outcomes. Conversations that could bring clarity. Apologies they never planned to give. Explanations they never prepared. And imagining these things scares them. Because imagination turns possibility into reality. And reality demands action. Understand this. What is unfolding now is not about immediate reunion. It is about truth surfacing. And truth always restructures things. Even if slowly. Even if quietly. Even if painfully. They are standing at the edge of vulnerability. And vulnerability is terrifying for someone who learned to survive by emotional control. But control is exhausting. And exhaustion makes honesty tempting. Last night cracked something open. And once cracked, it cannot be sealed the same way again. They may try. They may hesitate. They may delay. But internally the direction has shifted. The truth is not whether they still feel something. That answer has already revealed itself. The truth is whether they will have the courage to face it. And courage does not arrive all at once. It builds through discomfort. Through restlessness. Through nights that feel too quiet. Whatever comes next will not be accidental. Because silence has done its job. It has shown them what pretending costs. And now the heart is asking for honesty in return. Now everything inside them feels exposed. Not to the world, but to themselves. And that is the hardest kind of exposure. Because you cannot look away from your own truth once it stands in front of you. They are realizing that what they felt last night was not just emotion. It was recognition. Recognition of a bond they never properly closed. Recognition of a connection that did not end. It only went dormant. And dormant things wake up stronger. Sharper. More demanding. They are noticing how their chest tightens when they think about you. How their breathing changes. How their mood shifts without warning. These are not thoughts they can control anymore. These are reactions. And reactions do not lie. They are also realizing something else. That you were not just a person in their life. You were a mirror. You reflected parts of them they felt safest expressing. Parts they have hidden since the distance began. And without you, they feel incomplete in ways they cannot explain to anyone else. That realization is heavy. Because it means replacing you was never really possible. It only looked that way from the outside. Last night forced them to face the cost of silence. The cost of choosing comfort over courage. The cost of delaying honesty. And now that cost is being collected emotionally. In restlessness. in regret, in longing that refuses to stay quiet. They may try to convince themselves again that reaching out would be selfish, that it would disturb your peace, that it would reopen wounds. But deep down they know the real reason they hesitate. Fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of accountability. Fear of hearing that you no longer feel the same. And fear has been guiding them for too long. At the same time, hope has started to appear. Quietly. Carefully. Hope that maybe you still feel the connection. Hope that honesty might not be too late. Hope that vulnerability could bring relief instead of pain. And hope is dangerous. Because once hope exists, silence becomes unbearable. You may not see the struggle, but it is there. Building. Intensifying. Pressing them toward a decision they cannot avoid forever. Because a heart that has awakened will not accept numbness again. This is the phase where things shift behind the scenes. Where emotions reorganize. Where priorities change without announcement. Where intentions form before actions appear. And this phase always feels slow from the outside. But inside them it feels urgent. Crowded. Overwhelming. They are standing on the edge of truth now. And whether they step forward today or tomorrow, the direction has already been chosen internally. Because last night their heart broke its own silence. And once that happens, the truth does not retreat. It advances. From this stage onward their internal resistance is weakening day by day. They are realizing that silence is no longer neutral. It is now painful. Every hour they avoid truth it weighs heavier. Because once the heart wakes up it does not return to sleep easily. They are catching themselves thinking about moments they never valued enough while they were happening. Small things. Ordinary things. Conversations that felt simple then but now feel priceless. And this awareness is changing how they see the past. They are no longer rewriting the story to protect their ego. They are finally seeing it clearly. Seeing where fear interfered. Seeing where pride blocked connection. Seeing where they chose safety over honesty. What unsettles them most is this realization. That you may have felt this clarity long before they did. That while they were delaying, you were processing, healing, growing. And the idea that you might now be emotionally ahead of them creates anxiety. Because it means they may have lost the advantage of time. They may have lost the right moment. And nothing frightens them more than the possibility that you no longer wait where they left you. They are beginning to understand something fundamental. That love does not disappear when ignored. It transforms. It hardens. Or it waits. And waiting love is the most dangerous kind. Because it demands resolution. They are also noticing how their emotional defenses are starting to fail in unexpected ways. They react more strongly to emotional situations. They feel more sensitive. More irritable. More introspective. And they do not understand why until they realize it is because suppression requires constant energy. And that energy is finally depleted. At night their thoughts return to you again. Not dramatically. Not obsessively. But persistently. Like a quiet pull they can no longer resist. They imagine what you might say. What your tone would be. Whether your voice would sound distant or familiar. And imagining these things scares them because it makes the situation feel real. And reality requires courage. They are reaching a point where doing nothing feels worse than risking something. And this is where shifts happen. Not suddenly. Not loudly. But decisively. Because indecision cannot survive clarity forever. You must understand this clearly. This process is not about manipulation. It is not about timing games. It is not about control. It is about truth surfacing at its own pace. And truth does not rush. But it also does not stop. Whatever comes next will come because it has to. Because silence has exhausted its purpose. Because their heart has already crossed a line it cannot uncross. And once that line is crossed, the only question left is when honesty will finally speak out loud. Now they are standing at a point where their inner excuses are no longer convincing them. The stories they once told themselves feel hollow. The reasons they used to justify distance no longer bring relief. Because truth has a different weight. And once it settles in the chest, nothing superficial can remove it. They are noticing how their body reacts when they think about you. A heaviness behind the ribs. A pressure in the throat. A pause in breathing they did not consciously choose. These are not memories. These are responses. And responses come from what is still alive. They are also realizing that avoiding you did not erase the connection. It only froze it in time. And frozen emotions do not disappear. They wait. Preserved. Until the moment they are felt again in full force. Last night was that moment. The thaw. And what returned was not mild. It was intense. Overwhelming. And undeniable. They are starting to feel regret differently now. Not as self-blame. But as clarity. The kind that shows exactly where things went wrong. Where honesty was delayed. Where vulnerability was avoided. Where fear disguised itself as logic. And clarity hurts more than confusion. Because confusion allows escape. Clarity demands responsibility. They are beginning to ask themselves questions they avoided for too long. What if silence was the wrong choice? What if distance protected their ego but damaged something real? What if they misunderstood strength entirely? These questions echo quietly but persistently. And echoes grow louder when unanswered. They are also aware that time has passed. And time changes people. They wonder how you see them now. Whether you still recognize them emotionally. Whether you still feel anything when their name crosses your mind. And this uncertainty unsettles them deeply. Because they no longer feel in control of the outcome. And lack of control exposes vulnerability. At moments they almost convince themselves to stay quiet again. To let things remain unresolved. To accept loss rather than risk rejection. But something inside them resists this now. Because living with unanswered truth has become heavier than facing the possibility of pain. They are realizing something else as well. That you were not just someone they cared about. You were a turning point. A moment in their life where they felt seen, understood, emotionally safe. And losing that safety changed them more than they admitted. It hardened parts of them. Closed doors they never reopened. And last night reminded them of who they were before fear took over. They feel exposed now. Internally stripped of defenses. And exposure brings awareness. Awareness brings urgency. And urgency creates momentum. Even if slow. Even if hesitant. Even if delayed. You may feel this shift without explanation. A sudden emotional calm. A sense of anticipation without anxiety. A quiet knowing that something is aligning behind the scenes. That is not imagination. Emotional connections recalibrate when truth surfaces on one side. They are approaching a decision they can no longer avoid. Whether to remain silent and accept permanent uncertainty. Or to speak and accept whatever outcome follows. And this decision is heavy. Because it carries risk. But it also carries relief. Understand this clearly. What they felt last night did not happen to hurt them. It happened to wake them. To show them what they have been carrying without acknowledging. To force honesty into a space where avoidance once lived. This is no longer about the past. It is about alignment. About whether they will choose truth over comfort. Courage over control. And honesty over fear. Whatever happens next will not come from impulse. It will come from pressure finally reaching its limit. From silence losing its power. From a heart that has already spoken once and will not be ignored again. Because when a heart breaks its own silence, it is not asking permission anymore. It is preparing for truth to be heard. At this point their emotional landscape is transforming whether they want it to or not. The mind is no longer leading. The heart has taken control. And when the heart leads after a long silence, it does not negotiate softly. It demands alignment. They are realizing that every distraction they used before now feels temporary. Short-lived. Ineffective. Because the core issue remains untouched. You remain untouched. And that awareness is changing how they move through their day. They are slower. More reflective. Less reactive. As if something inside them is recalibrating. They notice how easily they are reminded of you. Not through obvious triggers. But through subtle moments. A tone of voice that resembles yours. A thought pattern that mirrors conversations you once had. A quiet moment where they instinctively think of sharing something with you before remembering the distance. And each time this happens it lands heavier than the last. Because it reinforces a truth they are no longer able to deny. That you are still emotionally relevant. Still central. Still unfinished. They are also becoming aware of the emotional cost they paid to keep things unresolved. How carrying unspoken truth drained them. How avoidance shaped their choices. How fear disguised itself as independence. And seeing this clearly brings discomfort. Because growth often begins with discomfort. And they are in that space now. They may begin to reflect on how they were perceived by you. Whether you saw their silence as indifference. Whether you felt abandoned. Whether you felt unheard. And imagining your perspective introduces a new layer of emotion. Empathy. Responsibility. And regret for not communicating sooner. This is where internal conflict intensifies. Because they want relief. But relief requires honesty. And honesty requires vulnerability. And vulnerability risks exposure. They are torn between wanting peace and fearing consequence. And this tension is exhausting. They are starting to understand that no matter what they choose next, silence or truth, there will be an emotional cost. But one cost leads to stagnation. And the other leads to clarity. And clarity is beginning to look less frightening than endless uncertainty. You may feel a subtle emotional shift within yourself as well. A loosening. A sense of readiness. Not for reconciliation necessarily, but for truth. And that readiness matters. Because when one side stabilizes, the other feels the contrast. They are replaying conversations they wish they had handled differently. Words they should have said. Moments they should have stayed instead of pulling away. And while they cannot rewrite the past, they are recognizing that the present still offers choice. This phase is quiet on the surface. But internally it is loud. Questions collide. Emotions surface. Priorities realign. And every internal shift is preparing them for an external one. Even if they do not yet know how or when it will manifest. They are beginning to realize that connection like yours does not return lightly. That if it has resurfaced now, it has purpose. It is asking for resolution. One way or another. There is also fear of disturbing your peace. Fear that reaching out could reopen wounds you worked hard to heal. And that fear is not selfish. It is aware. But awareness does not always justify silence. Sometimes awareness calls for careful honesty instead. They are learning this slowly. Through restlessness. Through reflection. Through nights that no longer offer escape. And learning is changing them. Making them softer. More grounded. More real. Whatever happens next will come from this place of internal truth. Not impulse. Not loneliness. Not confusion. But recognition. And recognition is powerful. Because once you recognize what matters, you cannot unsee it. Silence has reached its limit. Not because it failed, but because it served its purpose. It showed them what avoidance costs. And now the heart is asking for the next step. Not urgently, but honestly, this is where everything finally settles into truth. Not dramatic truth. Not rushed truth. But grounded truth that cannot be shaken anymore. They have reached the point where pretending costs more than honesty ever could. Where silence no longer feels safe. It feels empty. And emptiness is harder to live with than uncertainty. They understand now that whatever they do next will define the outcome. Not fate. Not timing. Not circumstances. Their choice. And that realization brings both fear and relief. Fear because it removes excuses. Relief because it returns control in the only form that matters. Authenticity. They are no longer asking whether they feel something. That question has already been answered too many times in too many quiet moments. The real question now is whether they will respect what their heart revealed last night, or betray it again through avoidance. And betraying the heart twice is far more painful than the first time. They know that reaching out does not guarantee reunion. That honesty does not guarantee forgiveness. That truth does not guarantee outcome. But they also know this. Silence guarantees regret. And regret is the one thing they are no longer willing to carry forward. They are preparing internally. Not rehearsing speeches. Not planning outcomes. But steadying themselves emotionally. Accepting that vulnerability is not weakness. That expressing truth is not intrusion. That acknowledging connection is not manipulation. It is respect. Respect for what was real. Respect for what mattered. Respect for you. They are also letting go of expectations. Understanding that whatever response comes will be valid. That your feelings matter as much as theirs. That you are not obligated to meet them where they stand. And this awareness is changing their approach. Making it calmer. More honest. Less demanding. You may feel this shift as a quiet certainty. Not excitement. Not anxiety. Just a sense that something is resolving. That loose emotional threads are being gathered. That unanswered questions are moving toward clarity. And that feeling is not coincidence. Emotional truth resonates across distance. This ending is not about promise. It is about alignment. Whether paths reconnect or separate permanently. What matters now is that truth is honored. That silence is no longer used as protection. That fear no longer decides. Last night their heart could not stay silent because it reached its limit. And limits exist for a reason. They mark the moment change becomes necessary. And change has already begun. Whatever happens next will come from honesty. And honesty never leaves you empty. Even when it hurts. Even when it ends something. Because it replaces confusion with peace. And peace, real peace, comes only when the heart and actions finally speak the same language.